first one tonight is a presentation, is it Hannah?
Hannah is stuck in traffic, so.
Okay, because, all right, well, I know
But yes.
Alexander Povich is here, and she will present along with Hannah Welser when she does come in. Present on a concept of a smoke-free town park. So I'll hand the baton to you.
I do have some packets. How would you like me to distribute?
Is that what you're going through?
Yes.
Let's pass them out.
So my name is Lexi Popovich. I'm the director of the Smoking Health Action Coalition of Livingston and Monroe County. Monroe Counties, we are a program of the American Lung Association. And we have been here before to kind of discuss the ins and outs of tobacco-free parks. And I'll just give a brief overview of some of the benefits, and then we kind of jump right into what's been going on with the state and what that means locally here. But tobacco-free outdoor areas, of course, protect individuals from secondhand smoke and promote healthy environments. When tobacco is less visible in the public landscape, youth are actually less likely to view it as a common part of adult behavior, to which they might expect to use and initiate with these products. With the expansion and rise of e-cigarettes that we've seen in the past several years with youth, creating spaces that don't allow tobacco or vaping is really important to educate youth and young adults on the risk that this has on their brain and health. As of October 2022, so just last month, New York State legislation did pass that smoking of tobacco and cannabis is actually prohibited in any public park, including parks, beaches, pools, boardwalks, recreation centers, group camps, marinas, and playgrounds. The smoke-free provisions apply to both state-owned parks as well as those managed by local governments. So ultimately, the state this would not include vaping or vaping of marijuana in these areas. So that includes all the municipal parks, including the town of Webster, would be smoke and tobacco-free with the use of smoking cannabis and smoking, combustible traditional cigarettes. But this does not yet include, the e-cigarettes or vaping of marijuana, which is highly prevalent among youth and young adults, especially in some of our suburbs that we've worked with and also a lot of schools. So we're kind of here to educate, and we're working with a lot of other municipalities in our community on the importance of adding in vaping, or even vaping marijuana as well into the law locally. So the state encourages that local municipalities make these more comprehensive because they did not include vaping. They also, the current public health law prohibiting the smoking in the local park does not include any sidewalks adjoining parks or public places, any pedestrian routes through park strips or malls, parking lots or roadways in any portion of the park that is not used for park purposes. So basically, we are educating our local leaders and stakeholders on the importance of adding vaping into this policy that was just passed through the state. There also is, the state authorizes local municipalities to impose a $50 penalty for some of these violations of using tobacco or cannabis, specifically smoking that in these parks. And in the packets, we provided information on the law, the New York State law, and what that would mean to add in vaping. And the village of Webster recently just went tobacco and vape free in all their parks and grounds prior to this state law coming into effect. And so I have provided a copy of that policy in there as well.
Any questions from the board at this point? Leslie, is that one part of the presentation that you want the Q&A?
Yeah, definitely. So
Okay.
That's just kind of a brief overview of kind of what we're looking to educate on, and if that might be of use to help the board with any questions or interest. We also provide free signage as well. We provided that free signage for the town of Arundecoit, the town of Harrington, the the town of Brighton and the village of Webster, including our local colleges that we helped go tobacco vape-free. That included University of Rochester, Nazareth College, and RIT. We're also working with SUNY Geneseo on hopefully an upcoming policy. So we do offer free signage, and I know with the new law, you can see in there that the state does require signage. So we can help with that as well, in terms of if the board was to decide that adding vaping is something that they're interested in.
So Lexi, I know that this is not the first time you've presented this to this board, but do I have it right that the last time we heard from New York State had not enacted this law yet?
That's correct.
So now New York State has enacted a law of smoke-free parks, which also includes all of our municipal parks.
That's correct.
So the only thing that we would be doing, should we decide to sign on to this suggestion, is we would be not allowing vaping.
Yes, so it would make local laws more comprehensive to add in no vaping. And we see that as one of the biggest issues with youth. You don't see a lot of adults in the parks vaping. It would primarily be groups of young adolescents sitting together and using these products, and also co-use with vaping of marijuana as well. Because this law does include the smoking of marijuana, it does not include specifically vaping of marijuana as well.
So what is the village putting forth with respect to enforcing this law?
There's going to be very enforcement.
So basically, at least best practices in tobacco control is signage as reinforcing and enforcing through the public, and posting of signage, educating the community on this law and making sure people are aware of this. So it kind of self-serves itself, that community citizens and members, if you have a family and someone is smoking cigars or cigarettes and there's kids around, usually people will say something or notice the signage. There have been parks that have receptacles at the entrances, so people are encouraged to know to not go use that in the parks as well. But I think overall, New York State does outline how enforcement does work, and it's also in the packet as well.
Yeah, I see where there's a $50 fine in there, but again, how do they enforce that?
So
Do
usually,
you call, so if there's a family there, and there are children, and there's a guy smoking marijuana or whatever, I take it they would call 911, and police officer would be dispatched. Am I following that right from an enforcement standpoint?
in the past, at least anecdotally, what we hear is people either would say something or bring this up to their town or village municipal government, or those who are out working the Parks and Rec department, who are actually visiting, doing trash and things at some of the parks. So that's usually where some of those mechanisms come into play. But usually, at least the state outlines that signage is one of the primary mechanisms of enforcement itself, and setting up precedent that is a healthy community, getting earned media when, say you were to include a vape into the policy, that would kind of, we worked with the town of Arundel, made a big announcement in the paper, we did a little press on it, and just really educating people on this so people are aware. So that's usually kind of the more enforcement techniques that even the state and comprehensive tobacco control usually promote.
I think what Councilman McHale was probably getting at is that we saw with the masking mandates around that there was a bit of overreach. I'm not saying there would be here, but there was a bit of overreach in some jurisdictions in some areas, including there was one incident, I think, at the Webster Central School District board meeting, one of the meetings. And it's a little unclear as to how these things are enforced, if somebody can put hands on, if somebody can just ticket them, and then who handles the ticket? Does it go to the town court? It's not the concept that concerns me as town attorney. It's how do we enforce it? Because otherwise it's meaningless. I mean, it's good to have up the signs and tell people they shouldn't be doing it. And I think that social pressure is pretty much wiped out most cigarette smoking, for example, and that's worked. This is going to be a little bit different. you have, as you said, it's mainly directed really toward adolescents who are smoking. I think most adults are going to comply. I don't think we're going to have an issue.
But at this point, the state has already put this law in place, and it's up to us and how we want to enforce it. We're just adding vaping.
Right.
And that,
Yeah, and I understand that, and I just fall back on how is it, how do we enforce this? If somebody calls and complains, okay? Because I don't envision myself, if I'm at a park and there's, a young adult vaping, yeah, I'm not gonna go over and tell them to stop. And there could be 10 signs over there saying you're not allowed to do that. But I fall back on enforcement, because I don't wanna be subjected to that. What do I do? Do I call the police department? What is the feedback that you have gotten from other municipalities with respect to what they have done for enforcement? Because the legislature can pass all sorts of laws. We've seen what they've done recently with the gun laws in New York State, which 2 of them have been ruled unconstitutional. I see the part here where they talk about, if it's taken to court, this is probably what would happen, but I don't know if this is a test in court yet. Do you?
No, but with this new law coming into effect in the whole state, I guess a lot of municipalities right now are probably coming up with similar things with enforcement and actually how to go about this.
Right.
I know locally, there have been, not a hotline, but an open forum that you could write complaints, or this park is seeing a lot of activity with youth. Can someone please check this out? So it's something to kind of keep a list of maybe complaints. Obviously, someone can't dispatch, right away. There's other things that are criminal that are happening, or other things that need to be taken care of. But maybe a list of, to keep.
This says a civil penalty. The law says civil penalty.
Yes, it does.
So it's not a criminal penalty, it's a civil penalty. I'm guessing, based on that it would go to, be up to the town to sue the person?
Yeah, so I think other municipalities before this law, code enforcement or other places that would kind of get involved if there's a civil penalty. A lot of the ones we worked with did not have punitive type, they didn't charge, money. It was more of an educational thing, the signage. But now with the civil penalty, like you stated, there's hopefully going to be more outlines through the state what this would look like with a range of municipalities, but it's already happening. So, this is something we're going to have to deal with anyways, but we can help provide those resources on how to kind of get there and what other places that we work with are doing as well.
Well, Councilman Gale brought up the fact of calling 911. If you do that, the police are doing it, so the police or the sheriff or somebody, you would not be, I don't foresee, we have our Commissioner of Parks and Recreation here, I don't foresee that he would have his staff enforcing this. I don't think. He wouldn't have the authority or the means, really. Nor would I recommend it. I think that's just a little concerning as to how exactly, what if somebody persists, they say, I'm not going to give you my name, I'm not going to, what do you do? Then it can then devolve into possibly a criminal matter at that point. You could have a harassment or a menacing or various kinds of quasi-assault.
This package with the Q&A, page 3 says, how's the law enforced? A person who violates the law by smoking outdoors in restricted areas is subject to, quote, a civil penalty of $50 for each violation, unquote. It's a great answer, but you're bringing us with what's the means to get to this civil penalty? Interesting. As Charlie said, Chris, you're here. This law was passed 3.5 months ago. It's relatively new. Also in the Q&A, it says, New York State law requires signs to be posted in the outdoor areas where smoking is restricted. Yes. So now, I know the parks, for the most part, are winding down. Bathrooms are closing, all that, but
So, I was aware that the legislation was there. I was not up to date. Usually, those are the updates we get from the State Parks and Recreation. So I would assume that probably in the next update is when we'll probably get the actual notice and the law, so to speak, in regards to a link. signage, and I agree with you, from, complying to the law, whether the town board decides to have vaping, that's probably going to be a further discussion. I agree with you, John, that the biggest issue that we will have is from an enforcement, because as Charlie, as you mentioned, being able to respond to those calls. We get them now, number of calls from a similar example is dogs off leash. People are at, one of the parks and there's dogs that are off leash. We get a number of calls. All we can tell them is basically exactly what you just said is, the ordinance is that the dogs have to be on a leash. We can't dispatch, so to speak, somebody out there. We have had, and I know of people that have called 911, but from a resource standpoint, I'm not sure that's
So just
kind
out
of
of
the
curiosity, Chris, and I don't know if this is applicable or not, but do you receive phone calls and complaints that people are vaping in our parks?
No. I'd say probably about the only time that we would get those type of calls between vaping, drinking.
Right.
Usually if there's some sort of athletic event, as silly as that sounds, but adult softball, that's a good example. We'll get an occasional call, that they were at a game and, the person next to them was smoking a cigarette or having cigars or drinking beer or whatever. We explain the town policy, etc. Now with this new regulation, we have a little bit of a different angle we can take. But I wouldn't say we get, the number one call that we get from those kind of concerns is from dogs off leash.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, we could debate all day long about whether we think the law is constitutional and this and that, the fact that there is, and try to correct me if I'm wrong. If it's a state law, we don't have the authority to write a code to say, oh, we're not going to adhere to it.
Apparently not. I mean, it's a state law.
As part of that, did you say that
It's here.
that the $50 fine was up to $50, or was that is part of the law?
That is part of the law for municipalities to handle.
And I also suppose that's how far each municipality wants to go to enforcement. So I know that there have got to be times when people are in the park and behavior is not appropriate. And they could be asked to leave if they want to continue that behavior that's not allowed in the park. And certainly if that were to escalate, now there's a whole nother reason that 911 would be called. But it does give you some wherewithal to say, I'm sorry, but that's not allowed in the park. If you want to continue, you're going to have to leave.
And that would be a police officer saying that, I take it.
Most
Obviously,
likely, because if
obviously,
it escalates,
Chris
that's-
isn't going to
I
dispatch
mean,
someone out
if it
there to
happens
do
at,
that. Nor would I recommend that.
8:45 at night,
Safety.
exactly when
Right.
there's a softball game going on, most likely that's.
Lexi, do you have more of these packets?
I have one more packet.
Oh.
I can.
Chris, I'd love for you to have one.
Yeah.
Because just the Q&A alone is the law's here, so we're going to have to do what the law says. But, yeah, we'll have to, I see the irony of the fact that the state puts out this law. Like I said, I'm not here to debate whether it's a good law or a bad law. What I think, and this is just my personal opinion, that the smoke that has the most pungent odor 100 yards away is not a cigar or a cigarette, it's marijuana. And I think whether you are smoking at a joint or whatever, vapes, it doesn't kill that smell. If you're smoking THC or marijuana in a vape, it's going to permeate that whole park. Which I find ironic that the state went for a law that wants to make smoke free.
It's probably because we legalized marijuana.
But you said that like smoking other forms of marijuana, and please don't make me rattle off all the ways you can smoke marijuana, okay, it's not a good look. But those are covered in this state law.
Right, so basically it almost seems, at least in the work in the field we're in, that it's covering a lot of adult behaviors. A lot of friends my age would use vaping cartridges, they're called, which is vaping marijuana. I often don't know many people who still smoke actual marijuana, like the actual plant. And not many adults, other than, youth and young adults and college to maybe 30s are doing a lot of vaping. So those aren't included in, when you think about, when you said the athletic events, sporting events where there's a lot of youth. I remember when I was in high school, we'd go to a lot of parks. That's where a lot of kids congregate. And I think this kind of, it's more of a signaling to, we work with the schools, more of a signaling to youth and superintendents and, that vaping is bad for you if you're that young. Vaping marijuana is bad for you. It's not legal under 21. So things like that, that's signaling that like this is not allowed here, and this is spaces where you go to exercise and hang out with friends. And I think that's kind of the more the principle of it.
And I don't want to cut, this is a great conversation and good dialogue. We have 15 seconds, but we continue on past 15 minutes if there's robust conversation. And we did. It's a great segue, though, to the next presentation with Josh Artuso and Jim Montgomery. I know, Jim, you just started here a couple months ago, and you've kind of shined the light on, we're trying to make sure that our code, laws, whatever, have a path to enforcement and then to the court system. And there is some ambiguity there. This one seems to have ambiguity. I don't know how you would get that $50 civil fine, and maybe the state has written up some things beyond the Q&A, but I'm going to guess not. So there's the enforcement, and John, you're right. I mean, that is, I certainly wouldn't advocate that, hey, tell Glenn in the Parks Department, they're going to be our new rangers for enforcing. No. So we'll have to have further conversation on that. And as far as whether we move to doing what the Village of Webster did and vape, that's another kind of fish too, I think, that needs further discussion. But,
Well, and I think that's the reason Lexi is here,
yeah.
is to educate us on why perhaps we might want to add vape to it. And I, for one, am not willing to let the enforcement issue stand in the way of making a statement about a healthier community. Because we've got enforcement as an issue right now.
Anything else on this tonight? Chris, we'll make sure you have one of these.
That's good, Bill.
Well, thanks, Lexi.
Thank you, appreciate it.